Right, welcome back to another video. So today we're going to be starting off on a new series looking at blueprints. Not sure how many videos we'll have, but hopefully we'll cover all sort of the interesting major topics in blueprints. Starting today with the UI and just kind of a general introduction. So let's get started. Right, well, if I right click here and create a new blueprint class, first thing I'm going to get is the sort of creation window. And before we do this, if I just close that a sec, I want to talk a little bit about how Unreal handles data and object types and things. So if we click and drag in an empty actor from the place actors window here, this is just what it says. It's an empty actor, has nothing inside it, a default scene root so we can see it, but it has this sort of series of properties, and so things like transforms, I don't know, inputs, collision, replication, these are all the things that exist kind of at the actor level. If I bring in a static mesh, so in this case maybe this sphere, well, that has a lot of the same things. It has a transform, it has the same collision, it has sort of rendering, all that kind of stuff. Some of that data has been inherited because the static mesh actor is a child of the actor class. So what does that mean? Well, you kind of write your class and then you make your children of that class and they inherit the data, and then you can kind of like override what you need to and kind of expand up. And if we create a new blueprint and go back to this, if we actually type in here static mesh, we can see static mesh actor is a child of actor, and so that data is being inherited. And if we actually look at what the static mesh actor has in it, it has the static mesh component. Well, again, if we go into our blueprint class, create, and type in static mesh component, you can see here the static mesh component is a child of mesh component, which is a child of primitive component, which is a child of scene component, which is a child of actor component. And so you're able to building up these levels of data. And so if someone wanted to come along and rewrite how the transform system works, you can do that in the sort of the parent place, and all that those children will inherit that same update. So it's a really powerful way of building data up. And that's kind of what this window is asking us. It's saying, which would you like to inherit from? Pick parent class. And we can see at the top here, we've got a list of sort of the most common ones with the buttons, but obviously down here in the all classes section, lots and lots, almost everything in the Unreal Engine is sort of a blueprint class that we can inherit from. So 90% of the time when working in blueprints, we're going to be making actors. These are just things we can place in the world. They have their own transform, they can have their own code, they can do whatever we like them to do, and that's what we'll be doing with most of the time. Pawns and characters are kind of playable characters or AI NPC type characters, and then kind of game mode and player controllers. This is how we kind of control our pawns and control the actual gameplay, and we might get onto these later on. And then finally we've got these components, and so we can take a blueprint and write something that doesn't exist inside the world but exists inside another part of another blueprint. So if you wanted to make kind of an inventory system, that's not a physical thing that exists in our 3D world, but it is something that exists inside other components or other actors, and that's what we might want to do here with these components. So in this case though, we're just going to be making an actor, and like I say, 99% of the time we're just using actor blueprints. Don't worry if that doesn't make loads of sense. It's a good idea to have some understanding about kind of the programming background side of things, but also we don't really need to know that to be able to do what we're going to be doing today, but hopefully that kind of makes a bit of sense. So if we create an actor blueprint, I'm just going to call it light example because we're going to be making a light today. I'm just going to clean up the two examples that I had there and bring a copy of this in, and because it's an actor blueprint, or inheriting from an actor blueprint, I can bring that into the world and see it here in the viewport. Double click on our blueprint to open up the blueprint editor, and we're just going to have a quick look at the UI. So main thing we have here, big viewport window. So we've got our own sort of 3D space local to our blueprint, and we can add meshes and everything in here. Details panel down the right hand side, this is going to be context sensitive. So as I select different things, it's going to give me different set of default details, which is very common for Unreal Engine. And then we have over here on the left, so we have our components menu or components tab. This is where we can add things to our blueprint. So in this case I might add a static mesh, and that will add that static mesh component here. And then we can go over to our details and just set that to be whatever mesh we want. So I might just use this background cube, and you can see we've now got a static mesh cube. Similarly, we can go in and we can add lights. So if I add a point light and just make it a lot brighter, you can see now we're lighting up our cube. And we can add as many components as we need. Obviously, meshes, lights, particles, these are going to be very common things, but you can add AI, behavior, audio, sounds, cameras, collisions, lots and lots of things that we can use. And we won't be going through all of these, but we'll cover the ones we need. Cool. So this is our components list. These are kind of like other things that exist within our blueprint. Moving down here, we also have the My Blueprint tab. So this is similarly, you might notice the same things. So here we've got a reference to our point light here. We've also got a reference to it as a component here. This is more of the sort of the programming side of things. So if we want to set the light color or what a static mesh is, we want to do that up here in our components. If we want to edit, let's say, how the mesh interacts with other objects, you might want to do that via creating events here. And we'll see that as we sort of develop our blueprints. Cool. The other two major tabs here in the UI, well, two at the bottom here. One, search bar, so we can find things, and we'll use that occasionally maybe, and also the compiler results. So as you saw, I clicked compile. We're writing code with Blueprint, so after you've written it, you have to compile it to make sure that you haven't made any errors, and if you did have any errors, they would come up down here. And then the last two tabs, these are the sort of the really interesting ones. We have here construction script, an event graph. And you'll see they start with these input nodes, and this is a sort of like our the start of our code, as it were. And there's a big difference between the two things. So the construction script is a one-time thing. It runs once at the editor time or on creation. So if we wanted to do things like randomize a color or sort of do the initial setup of a character, like armor sets or something like that, that could all be done in the construction script. But it won't run during gameplay. So if we wanted to have any kind of damage systems or any kind of animation, that would need to be done in the event graph. And that's the sort of the big difference between the two. So we'll be using them both briefly today. But generally, yeah, construction script runs once, single setup-y thing, never going to run again during runtime. An event graph, that's the sort of gameplay type side of things, that's only going to run in real time. One note, if we just close those both off, normally when we close a window, we can go up to window and bring it back. And in fact, if I close my viewport, that's exactly what I do to get that back, window, viewport. But construction script and event graph don't live up in the window tab because they're not actually individual windows. They're actually accessed here via the My Blueprint. So if I open up the construction script here, double click, that's going to open this up here for us, and the same event graph, and that will get that back. So as you get more complex blueprints, you might want to have lots of different tabs open, you might want to close them back, but you can always get them back and access them here via the My Blueprint section rather than the window. Cool. Okay. Right. Well, that's all the sort of major UI elements. I'm just going to delete my static mesh for now. I'm just going to have just this point light, and if I go in and just do a quick sort of side by side, you should be able to see that my point light is here inside my blueprint, lighting up my my environment. So now I have this point light inside of my blueprint. I might want to edit some values on it. We can go up, select it here, and then change our kind of color or whatever we want here. That's fine. But we might want to do that sort of programmatically rather than just sort of setting a default. And so we need a reference to that object. And the way we do that, well, there's many ways to do that, one of which we can just drag in straight from the components. So if I drag and drop there, I'll have a reference to that point light component, and now I can kind of access that and change the colors or intensities. I can do the same thing down here, and if we bring this in, we're going to get two options, either get the point light or set the point light. And so this is quite a key programming concept. Either we're getting information from the object or we're overriding information on the object. So in this case, we would get the point light, and we would have that same node here. And also if we right click, we bring up the sort of add blueprint node function, and if we start typing in point light, down here at the bottom we've got also get point light, and that's going to take the same thing. And this is all live, so if I go back to my component and just rename that to be my point light, you can see all of those references update as well, and so it's looking back to those things. So we'll use whichever makes more sense at the time, but different ways to do the same thing. So what might we want to do to our point light? Well, if we click on the details, click on it in the component list, then it will come up in the details panel. We've got access to all of these things, and we can set these values. So in this case, I'm actually going to use just the light color. And if I just right click in my background and type in light color, you do have here nodes. The blueprint sort of editors is good enough to work out that we've got a light here and we want to have a light color. But if we had a lot of lights in our component list, or it's giving us a lot of other information for things that we might want to have here. So really good workflow tip. Always make sure to pull off the pin of the object that you want to edit. So in this case, I've created a reference to my point light. I pull the pin off to that and then type in light color. You see we get a much smaller list of sort of things that we can have that might edit this point light. So a really nice workflow tip. If we turn off context sensitive, you can see there's loads of things that could affect light color. So we're just trying to minimize this down as much as possible. You can get quite complicated things going on in blueprints, and so anyway we can use the UI to sort of workflow that smoother, or sort of smooth out that workflow I should say. We want to do that. So taking the pin, pulling it off, and then we can type in light color. Now again, we've got our get and set kind of values. So there's two things we could do. We could either read the color off the point light already, or we could replace the point light color using the set command. So we're going to do that, and we're going to use the set command to overwrite the point light color. Now I've quickly hit compile, and if we look at the world, the light is gone because we've overridden it with black. And black light doesn't do anything. So note, if we select it in the component list, it's still showing as white, but it's being overridden by the construction script to be black. We click on the little swatch, we can change that color. If I make this red and I compile, now we're going to have a red light. And so we've made a dynamic light color changing thing, and we're using just a simple code to overwrite that light color with whatever we set it to be. Now that's really useful. Potentially, if you want to change the light colors of things, you could have team-based colors, all that kind of thing. But also, we want to have the ability to edit that on the blueprint itself. And so we're going to build up a few little extra steps to make this more useful. Now, down in our components list, we have references to the light. But this is a thing, isn't it? It's a component. It's an actual kind of part of the blueprint. But we can also have variables that just store data. And so if I click here, the plus variable icon, we can create a variable, and I'm just going to call it light color. And we can kind of bring that in and do things with that. And so we can also store data directly as a variable. Now, there are thousands of variable types, or hundreds at least. If we open up all of these things are data types, and we won't be covering all of these either, but some of the more common ones, we'll definitely be using those where we can, and where we need to. So going down this list, things like Boolean, on or off, float, that's going to be sort of single value floating point data. If I select my point light, something like intensity, that would be a float. But looking at that variables list, there isn't color. Now I could store color as a vector, but actually if I type this in, color, I know, because having done this before, what I'm looking for here is actually a linear color. And if you mouse over, look at the tooltip, it does say linear color structure. So I can do linear color, and that's now the correct variable type to be able to connect in here. Now as a workflow, that's fine. If you know what variable types you're dealing with, that's no problem. If I just create a quick vector, vector being 3 color or 3 channels of data X, Y, and Z, it will let me convert a vector into a color. And so there are ways you could do that. But if I created a quick Boolean, and this would just be a single on-off true-false value, it shouldn't convert. And so when you're dealing with data, you need to make sure you're dealing with the right data types. You can't just plug a true and false into color and have it assume something. So rather than doing this workflow of creating the variable first, there's actually a better way to do that. And if I just delete these, clean that up a second, any variable or any data item that we want to turn into a variable, we can just right click, and then we've got this option promote. Now we're not going to use local variables, we'll cover those in another lesson, but in this case we're just going to promote to a variable. And what that's going to do is it's going to do all those steps for us that we just did. So it's going to create a new variable, and it's given it the name new variable 0. Well, we can fix that in a minute. But the important thing is here is it's picked up the right variable type. And so I know, from having done this a few times, that light color, or that light color should be a linear color structure. Well, I don't need to know that. I can just promote a variable from that sort of data input, and it will do that for me. So that's definitely the way that I like to work and work with promotions. If we compile this now, see we have access here on the variable to the defaults. So if I set that to be 1, we're going to get our red color. And because this is now a variable, we're not having to recompile this each time, because we're just changing the data inside it. So if you've used materials and material instances, you'll kind of be used to this idea of parameters being not needing to sort of recompile. Because we're not changing the code, we're just changing the data, if that makes sense. And we can see we can get lots of different colors of lights all here. Now this is great, this works really well. But what would be even better is if we could select the blueprint in the world and have different colors in different blueprints. And we can do that. So if I go back in here and edit, so with any variable, we have this option here below the variable type, instance editable. And what does that mean? Well, that means that we can actually edit it per instance of the blueprint. So if I enable it here, notice there's a little eye icon. That's supposed to be an open eye, and it's the same data in 2 places. So if I click this open and closed, it's the same as setting this up here, and you can see if I edit one, it edits the other. If I minimize this down now, you'll see we haven't given it any categorized, but in the light color section, we now have access to that light color. So we've made a very simple user editable blueprint. And we can make another one, so blue over here. Very cool, very powerful. This would be how we could set up all sorts of tools. So if you're making a blueprint that might want to be something that you can edit in the world, you can set, I don't know, however you want to do it, whatever the possibilities of coding are immense. So something I've done not too recently, but was create a bookshelf. And so you have specified the number of levels, number of books, all that kind of thing. And so you had a nice dynamic bookshelf generation script, and you could just place them around and then tweak some settings, and you're giving yourself full artistic control, but within the logic of the blueprint system that you're using. Pretty cool. So we could go in and do this for all sorts of other parameters of our point light, and if I just pull this off, we might have set intensity. So this is a another kind of edit set value thing. So we know that we've got a reference to our point light, and we're going to connect this in line in our execution. So these white pins here, these are called the execution pins. This is actually the code running, and so it starts here. First thing, loads into the construction script, goes along, sets the light color, and now we need to connect the output of this into the input of this one. Now personally I like to sort of work nice and neat and tidily. Either this is neat and tidy, but when we're dealing with, I mean this is more of a kind of personal workflow thing I guess, but when we're dealing with similar things, so here, these two are both affecting a property of this point light. I would stack these vertically and then move across horizontally to do the next thing. But it's entirely up to us, but we do want to keep our blueprints as neat and tidy as possible. Very easy to create a mess, and a mess is no good for you, because when you come back in 6 months time, you'll have forgotten how anything works and have to kind of unpick it. But it's even worse if you're working in teams and someone hands you a blueprint. It's like, oh, can you just edit that thing there? And you're like, no, because it's a mess and it's going to take me a week to work out what's going on. So anyway, workflow tips aside. So as this is uncompiled, nothing's being done. If I click compile, all my lights are going to go off because I've set the intensity to be 0. Fine, not a problem, but I want to create a variable for that. I know this is a float. It's a floating point value. You can see the decimal in there. That's the sort of hallmark of a floating point value. And obviously if we tooltip over it, it will see float. And also they're color coded, so you can see the different data types are color coded in the nodes themselves, and the pins and the lines and all this. So if we promote this, we might call this, I don't know, light intensity. Just go with that, because that's what it is. So similarly to lining things up, it's a good idea to name all your parameters correctly. And it says here, default value, please compile the blueprint. So until we've compiled that once, it's not going to let us access the default value. I'm just going to stick that back up to 50,000, which is what we had before, roughly. And we can see our lights have come back. And if we scrub this back and forth, we can see we're affecting them individually. Now that's great, but this isn't instance editable yet. I can't make my blue light bright and my green light dim. So if we click on the instance editable, now we can do that for our individual lights per blueprint. And we can set this one to be really dim, or oops, 5,000. There we go. And we can control our light intensity as well as our light color. Really powerful. Maybe got a bit too high. There we go. Cool. So this is all in our construction script. This is all our initial setup. We're starting to use variables and we're starting to create, kind of expose those variables to the user. And this works really, really well. But let's say we wanted to have a some kind of gameplay interaction or some kind of animation. This happens over time. So if we jump over to the event graph, there's a few different things that we can see straight away. We have these ghost nodes. So these are nodes that have come with the engine, just sort of like hints that, oh, you might want to use this. And we can, I guess. So we'll just cover what they are first. So event begin play. This is a one-time on startup set of code. So in this case, we've done our initial setup here in the construction script, but you might also want to do things on sort of game loads. So if you were referring to other actors, or if you wanted to kind of spawn some AI and then trigger something on those AI, you might need to do that in begin play, or kind of like in the early part of the game. But this is a one-time thing. Event actor begin overlap. This is done this is how collisions work. So if you walk into a collision box, or the begin overlap, it's saying that two objects are kind of colliding. One is on top of the other, and this will trigger off our collision events. And then we have finally event tick, and this is every frame. So some things need to be updated every frame. Some things, well, every frame is usually quite expensive. If you're doing anything on tick, you want to be a little bit careful, just because there's hopefully at least 60 frames every second. So those kind of calculations can add up very, very quickly if you're doing it every second or every tick. But sometimes we have to. If you want nice smooth animations, that has to be done on tick. Cool. So actually what I'm going to do, I am going to use begin play, and I'm just going to set this up as a one-time thing. So event begin play, and I'm going to create a little loop, and that's just going to turn the lights on and off after a sort of specific time. So I'm going to use a delay node, and this is a just a quick pause. So in this case, the default time is 0.2 of a second. Well, I set that to 1, and so it's going to wait 1 second, and then once it's waited 1 second, I'm going to do a thing. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my point light and I'm going to do a toggle visibility. And so what this is going to do is if the light is on, it's going to turn it off. And if the light is off, it's going to turn it on. And actually what I'm going to do is going to go back here. And there's nothing stopping us doing this and plugging one connection back into itself. And you have to be a little bit careful doing this because you don't want to create an infinite loop. But in this instance, as an example, we can create just a simple 1 second on, 1 second off blueprint. And if I just bring that down, and then I'm just going to simulate rather than play, hopefully every second our lights will flash, which works really well. So this is how we can then use the event graph to trigger things on and off. If I actually open up that blueprint, we have up here the debug filter. So because it's simulating, and you can see it up here, it's saying simulating, if we select any one of those light examples, we can actually get a good visual representation of what the code is doing, which is a really nice way of debugging things. Doesn't work in ConstructionScript very well, because ConstructionScript all happens within a single frame. But here with the event graph, we can see we're getting that 1 second delay and then toggling our visibility. And we can create our lights flashing on and off, which is pretty cool. So I'm just going to stop that for a second, and I'm going to do one more little thing for today's lesson, as sort of an introduction, and we're going to create a random value. So rather than waiting 1 second, if I pull off this float, type off in random, we can create a random float. Now I want to do a random float between a min and a max, so a random float in range. And if I select that, let's say anything between 0.01 and 0.1, so quite a lot faster. And if I just compile that and then simulate, and we should get, maybe a bit too fast, a kind of light switch rave. We're getting a bit of a nightclub vibe going on here. Let's try slightly higher numbers. And because every time it's going around that loop, it's creating a new random value, and we're getting that kind of, they're not staying in sync as they were before. So before, when it was just 1 second, we just do like something a bit longer, and we're able to kind of now create some nice cool random flashing lights. Very nice, very powerful. So as an example, hopefully there, we've covered ConstructionScript, this idea of making user editable variables and inputs, and so we can control kind of the brightness and the color of our lights via the blueprint input sections, and then also the idea of the event graph, and so we can have kind of our own logic, and we'll cover a lot more. This isn't necessarily a very good way of doing this, but hopefully it illustrates the point of what the event graph can do and edit things over time. Cool. Okay, well I think we'll leave it there for today. Hopefully that has been helpful and informative. As I say, we're going to be doing a whole series of things here about Blueprint, so come and check back next time. And as always, big thanks to my patrons for supporting the channel. Wouldn't be possible without you, so yeah, hopefully keep doing that. And if you want to email me any questions about blueprints or VFX, game dev, anything at all, my email address is on screen there, so don't hesitate to come be in touch. Awesome. Right, well, as I say, hopefully that was helpful, and I'll see you all next time.